So a few weeks ago, I had a stack of books that I read this year that I loved so much that I decided I really have to get these on YouTube somehow. They're so good, I need to show that. So I made a video of my top 10 most favorite books of the year so far. And this year, it's going to be for worst. Now, in the last video, most of them were books that didn't come out this year. In fact, now that I think about it, none of them were from this year. But it was the ones that I read that year. So I just want to be clear about that, and for this list, it's going to be the same. So if you have a book that you like that's on here, I'm sorry. It's not fact that it's bad, it's just my opinion that it's bad. If you like it, that's awesome. So before we start, I wanted to point out two books that probably would have made this list. The first one is this play by Molière that I read in French class called L'Avare, and come to think about it, it should be in the video, but it's just not because it's a play. The other one is a book I haven't finished yet and I don't want to finish, the Fifth Cherub book, Divine Madness. I read the first two chapters and I decided, no, I don't want to finish this ever. And that's funny because it's really rare these days for me to put down a book no matter how bad it is. And two of these books I couldn't finish. So yeah, if a book's like that, it really is pretty bad. So now let's start the countdown, starting at number 10. So coming in at number 10 is The Alchemist, The Secrets of the Immortal Nicholas Flamel by Michael Scott. I've had this book for a very long time and I never would have picked it up if I didn't get into the habit of starting to read. I mean, too many times it feels like a cheap knockoff of Percy Jackson, and too many times it just goes into stench jokes and these two kids who are all of a sudden so whiny, and basically the only thing they do is complain. They go, why is this happening to us? Why did it have to be us? Is this real? Is it a dream? And by around the 10th time that they said that, I just went, ugh. I think it does have a good adventure, but I really felt the pages because it spends too much time with the wrong character. It slows itself down too much and its writing is just so irritable. So am I going to read the rest of this series? I don't really know. Now number 9 is a book that was recommended to me by my friend, and it is Dueled by Elsie Chapman. Now one thing that I will give this book right off the bat is that she does a very good job of showing off this world in which kids die every day because they always have to prove themselves by beating their twin or losing to their twin. But when that's the only thing that goes on for the entire book, just a giant hunt, and not to mention the character is a complete moron, really. The thing is, I really didn't want to read about that. I wanted to read a book that involved the character doing something nice. Not to mention that there aren't too many chapters in this. Every chapter is like 30 pages, and I was let down by the little fake cliffhanger in almost every one of them. She delivers action every 25 pages, and the ending was a complete disappointment. I kept waiting for it to turn good, and these characters are just so boring, especially the main character, and all their names sound like they were borrowed from something like Battlefield Earth. And coming in at number 8 is an adult book that I found off my grandpa's shelf. What Time Devours by A.J. Hartley, and the reason that I was intrigued to read it was because it was about this long-lost Shakespeare play, Love's Labour's Won, that's apparently a sequel to a Shakespeare play called Love's Labour's Lost. And imagine finding a brand new Shakespeare play in this time, that would be worth a fortune, and this book shows it. There is the occasional action scene, and there is a lot of information on history, of poetry, but to the point where it gets a little ridiculous. There's so much detail it almost feels like a textbook at certain parts. The mystery was just too ridiculous for me to dive into and understand at all. A bad book usually has a bad ending, and this one, oh, it does. It's not the worst that it could have been, but at the end I was thinking, Who likes this? Who's gonna be impressed by this? I sure aren't. Now coming in at number 7 is one of those books where I decided I couldn't take it anymore. It was my first shelving in a very long time, and that is The Day of the Trifids by John Wyndham. I'm sorry, I don't really like classics that opened to moderate acclaim and then got famous the more old they became. And it's kind of a shame because in 10th grade I read The Chrysalids, which is also by John Wyndham, as you probably know, and I liked that book well enough. So I guess I was pretty interested at the start, but then when I suddenly realized what this book was actually going to be about, not a science fiction, let's save everybody, but a giant way of restabilizing the human race, I decided there's no reason for me to continue. The main character is so boring, he's not interesting, he's unemotional, he doesn't seem to be scared whenever there's a gun around or anything, so I just went to Wikipedia and looked up how it ended. I decided there's no reason for me to read that. I was able to find out what a Trifid actually looked like, so kudos there, I guess. So this is probably the book that I was the most excited for on this list, and probably one of the biggest disappointments I have ever read. And that would have to be The Scorch Trials by James Dashner. Let me tell you the difference between the Maze Runner book and the Scorch Trials book. The Maze Runner is the last meal, and the Scorch Trials is the execution. This book kills the entire franchise, it buries it right into the ground. There are so many character deaths that the characters don't seem to care about. The little betrayal part was so ridiculous. I still have that question about why Teresa was in that certain place in the desert. I wanted answers to some questions, and I guess we'll get those in the Death Cure, but at least have at least one good answer. It's like the Scorch Trials was the bad third act of The Maze Runner and the bad first act of the Death Cure. But as for the movie, I might be pointing that out in another video later. So this is the first African fiction book I've read, and it will probably be the last. This is called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, if that's how you say his name. I don't know, and I don't really care. It's apparently, well, what is it about? It's about this man named Okonkwo and his, I don't know, Nigerian family who he abuses and never says please to or anything. Just, there are so many weird characters that I guess they are African names, but Okonkwo doesn't learn anything in this. It's basically about, in his words, his world turning into a herd of women, and how whites are taking over, and how they deserve to rot in hell or something. So I guess right off the bat, this wasn't my piece of cake. It's not gross, and if it were, then it would probably be number 1, but all along, I kind of half expected to miss Shinua's name already being in the book or something, because I didn't care about a single thing in this. I didn't care if all the characters ended up being murdered. In fact, I kind of hoped that they would. And I got nothing out of this except the ambition to not read any more African fiction, even though this was the first. Now, coming in at number 4 is the only book that I don't have with me, and is the only book that was released this year. Against all odds, I've been a fan of the Dork Diaries books. I've had a mixed feeling with most of them, but the second one was pretty good, the fourth one was better. I think I moderately liked the 8th one, the 5th one a little, and the 7th one was very close to making my best book list. It was great. It set such a bigger step for the franchise. But then we got number 9. And I think I'm just done with this franchise now. I had very high expectations for this book. Mackenzie getting Nikki's diary. That could be good. That could end up being very suspenseful. That could end up being heartbreaking. But instead, it ended up being a way for Rachel Renee Russell to rip us all off, and it seems like she didn't even know that. I'm kind of tired with Nikki and Brandon always getting into a relationship problem when it's very clear that they're destined for each other and that one of them will just make a lousy mistake, Nikki probably. After the end of book 7, I thought that was over. Also, I was really looking forward for this author meet and greet that was introduced in the first book. This was when it was supposed to happen, and it was just another ripoff. It was sort of like that Trevor Chase thing when in the 5th book it was promised that he would be in the 6th book, but he ended up being delayed in the 7th book even though he was supposed to be in the 5th book. And instead of all this Mackenzie suspense, we end up with a big portion of the book just with Mackenzie bullying people and us reading about something we would rather not be reading. This one's just a big cash grab. Now, remember my other worst book list from several months back? Number 4 was Hyperion, and I was given it because my dad tried to read it and gave up on it, so my mom gave it to me. And yes, I hated it as well. This book is sort of the same case. My mom read it, gave up on it, and gave it to me. And once again, I hated it just as much, maybe even more. This is Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Now, I admire Margaret Atwood. She recently spoke up against the horrid Bill C-51. There's the 10 best Canadian artists, and she made number 1. I read a year back one of her books, The Handmaid's Tale, and I guess I liked it enough to recommend. I didn't think it was anything special, but I guess I enjoyed its writing well enough and its understanding of sexism. But Alias Grace made me question if I ever actually liked that. It's about this girl who was apparently real back in like the 1840s and to 60s, maybe even a little longer, called Grace Marks, who was imprisoned for killing Nancy Montgomery and Dr. McDermott, I think. In the end, I thought, this is a book about a complete wimp. I was expecting a book about a lady who is proven innocent after years of incarceration and something inspiring, maybe something a little testing for Grace. Something like she decides she's gonna try to escape or something, or she's gonna find love in prison, or not something like her trying to recollect her memories to show that she didn't commit it. Because it was so stupid. I mean, Grace has all of these interesting details about her life, but she can't seem to remember how she was imprisoned. That doesn't make sense. Like, Grace can remember this onion that gave her family wind, but she doesn't remember how the murder took place that's put her in jail for 15 years. Also, the end result was so disappointing. It took a turn that was so wrong. It made me mad how this book ended. Just, that's not how books like these should end. Now, for number 2, I was looking forward to this. I didn't really like the first one that much. I read the first book when I was just starting to be a book critic, and I said that the book gave off wink after wink that the next installment would be better, and I'm sorry to say that it isn't. This is the second book in the Heart of Dread series, Stolen, by Melissa de la Cruz and Michael Johnston. I might have to reread Frozen Heart of Dread to see if I ever actually liked it, just like The Handmaid's Tale with Alias Grace. The book spends so much time saying the wrong thing. It shifts between Natasha Cassell and Ryan Wesson. Both of them say, I love them, but we're not supposed to be together. Things that they actually say together don't make any sense. I forgot about a lot of the characters, so I was able to see them with a fresh perspective this time, but they once again became a clunker. I was kind of looking forward to this to see how the characters would react to a civilization where things could grow. I wanted a big battle with Natasha and her Draken, and her Draken gets sort of killed off temporarily on like one of the very first chapters, and I automatically knew something was wrong in that department. And the book also spends so much time trying to look for this character that I thought after reading the first book they would find during the first 100 pages or something. Also, this book is only 272 pages. I've read a lot of books that are much longer than that, And this book took me like 2 weeks to read because it was so annoying. Too many times the characters got captured, and like, did this Bradley character really think that Wes was going to stay on board this little thing? It's sort of like a prisoner working with the cops when the cop who imprisoned him and likes to blab about it still is around. Like, who expected that to continue? But there's still one other book that I decided that's gonna be the first one. So another thing about Hyperion by Dan Simmons, it's basically just 6 stories, and all of them were so boring, but they still stayed together in between the story. Hyperion had an actual story to it, like a reason for all these stories to be told, to find out why the time tombs are opening. And I didn't realize that books could be as bad as Field of 13 by Dick Francis. This was my first shelving in over a year since I picked it up. It's actually just a story about 13 different stories that have nothing in common except horses being told just one by one. 13! I didn't know that short story novels were a thing, and I couldn't see how anyone could ever like them. Hyperion had those, but at least it had an actual story to the stories. The first story is about this man who fakes an alarm and robs a stable, and then the next one is about this murder that takes place on a regular road, I guess. And then it shifts to the next one. Sometimes I like it when a criminal can get away, but I don't want him to get away clean. Well, I do, but I want the police to have some sort of connection so that we can have some suspense of him getting recaptured later. And then it just forgot about it and went to this story about this man who wants to steal a horse, with a twist at the end that I hated. It's why I hate some books. And then to this other woman named Angela who was always happy, to a man who was mistreated at a restaurant. It made me allergic to the word horse. I decided after about 200 pages that I just couldn't take it anymore. So anyway, that's my 10 worst books of the year list. I'm probably not going to do another one of these videos for January. Let me just say that I like more books than hate. So just these are ones that I wouldn't recommend you go buy or borrow or anything. And I hope you enjoyed the video. So thanks.